Hey everybody, welcome again to another episode of the ADHD Shop. I'm Ash, the engineer with more projects than common sense. And if you're like me and are stuck behind a desk all day, you find yourself always dreaming but hardly driving. So instead of waiting for this beard to grow out to form the new Indian ZZ Top,
But every girl is crazy about a sharp-dressed man.
I figured now's a good chance to give some updates of what I've been up to for the last couple months. Now, if you remember last time, I was still looking for a job, and I finally found one luckily during the day, which keeps me hustling at night to get the shop up and going for my side conversion business. And so because of that, I've been taking on a lot of different side projects, which include welding, as well as wiring and anything automotive related, as well as some cool other stuff, which I'll show you in just a bit. But one of the cool things that I wanted to add to my shop that will help me with those automotive restorations and with those critical parts that we hate to clean up otherwise is this vapor honing machine behind me. Now, the overcritical engineer in me always wants the best because I've gone through so many cheap tools and gone through so many things and replaced that I'm just tired of buying things that are inferior products. So I've always wanted to get the top-notch stuff, and with this thing, it was a pretty penny that I was hoping to get a lot better quality out of, but we'll see. I kind of found a couple things that out of the gate I'm not too happy with, but hopefully this thing will produce some cool parts, and we'll take a look at what it does in just a second during my first run of this. But I wanted to kind of circle around some of the things I noticed. I just got this thing yesterday and unboxed it, and I finally got a couple things fixed after a few fittings and stuff broke while it was shipped. So once I got all that stuff going, I finally got everything in with the water, and as you can tell from the water in the ground, the first thing you want to do is make sure that the valve is closed on the bottom so you don't have water all over the place like I do. So in any case, let's go around and take a look at some of the things I found to be, not so great that I'd hope would be a little bit better. But, again, that's just me.
You can think of vapor honing as a mix of pressure washing and bead blasting all in the same operation. I guess the process has been around since World War II apparently, but I, however, have been looking into this for about 3 years after pissing off through countless scrub brushes to clean parts and never quite getting the surface that I wanted. I bought a bead blaster a while back, which has its time and place. It leaves a good surface if you want to paint or powder coat afterwards. Vapor honing, on the other hand, offers a smooth finish and perfect for those aluminum castings and parts that have built up gunk over the years. Before I start my rant about things that bug me, the company itself is awesome. Great customer service, and they were able to answer all my questions over the last 3 years. I had a part that was broken, and they immediately sent me a replacement. The model that I got was the closed loop VH800. Since nothing is ever easy for me, instead of having a hose to supply water constantly, the closed loop unit is self-contained with media and water. I have to go out to the other end of the complex and fill buckets of water, and this case took about 7 5-gallon buckets to fill the unit, along with the water pump boxes. As for dimensions, according to the website, it's 33 inches wide, 30 inches deep, and 28 inches high. It's a lot smaller than I expected since those dimensions seem big enough. I measured roughly 30 inches wide, 29.5 inches deep, and about 27 inches wide. It looks like I have to be upgrading really soon. The thing that really annoyed me right away was the fact that everything is exposed. Why did that fitting break during shipping? Alright, it was exposed. Even though I have a tendency of breaking things, if this thing is designed to be stationary in a shop or especially in a normal car garage, things will hit it and it will break. You have sensitive hardware and plumbing that I expect to at least have a shroud over it or something. With exposed plumbing and such, you also have these tubs that are plastic totes that hold fresh water, which I guess are used for the rinse hose. Yeah, I guess this is going to be fun now having this right at my entrance. This is where being a klutz isn't going to be good. They could have done a better job at these storage bins and figuring something out to make it a little bit better. One thing I hate the most are these sheet metal frames. I've always ended up making a new one or reinforcing or welding it all together. I get it, it's lighter, it's easier to ship, and it's cost effective to make, but all my loads are on rivets. The website showed a box tube frame, which clearly this is not. Better start taking dimensions and getting material and start thinking of making another one in 2025. On the bottom of the sheet metal is a single hole for my favorite thing in the world, rubber desk chair. Oh wait, this looks like clean room equipment rollers. I've never had one of these where the rubber doesn't separate. I'm leaving my 3-wheel motion to my busted trailer, thank you. More on that later. Ooh, and the best part is that it's held with a single post with a nut and a lock washer. Really? I've never had one of these not loosen up and buckle. I gotta replace these with heavy-duty bolted flange casters that won't get destroyed on the dust and crap on the floor. One of the nice things though are the LED lights and the windshield wiper. Another annoyance though is insulated wire covers. You can never really get a consistent crimp with these things because the plastic is absorbing the crimp force rather than the metal. Come on, this is not cool. They have 90-degree terminals, you know. Well, let's see how it works. I started with the spare Honda N600 head that I had laying around. This is an intricate part for an engine that is air-cooled that relied on these cast fins for cooling. The ports and castings have seen better days, so let's put it to the test. I did have to compare, and wow, the gasket surfaces aren't even coarse and they're incredibly clean. While I wouldn't use this on steel gears and stuff, the valves and springs seem to have cleaned up, although I would have probably removed them on the next round. Way cool. I tried a few other things like these old mini wheels, an M42 flywheel, and the Simca Honda bell housing. So, back to the projects. It's been a crazy last few months, and while I was really trying to save up money to pay for this editing software, I picked up a few cool welding projects to get some cash in my direction as unemployment had just expired. One of these projects was a 1953 Plymouth Suburban, hot rodded out with a 4.6 dual overhead cam Cobra engine and manual transmission. I'm not gonna lie, this thing was pretty badass and at the same time quite a challenge. While my shop neighbor dealt with the suspension with his wizardry, I had a few things that the owner wanted to install, which included these 3-point safety belts. So, the first thing I did was buy a generic 3-point kit online. We have to remember that the safety standards 68 years ago, if any, was nothing as they were today. No fluffy electronic accident protection systems, no airbags, no additional side impact protection, just the impact absorbing nature of solid American steel. While some would simply drill a hole, bolt the hardware in and call it good, the engineer in me can't get past the 65 years of aging. That 18-gauge steel was patched, rusted, and primered and really wouldn't fend well in an accident in today's standards. So, as always, a 3-hour project now becomes a 2-day project. I started with locating the top B-pillar anchor points. These B-pillars were more aesthetic than anything, so there was very little structural material to grab onto. The bottom also needed not only a complete removal of paint and other residue, but also some structural parts for the retractable reel and third anchor. After I located those points, I went and fabbed up some structural parts. Most automotive hardware is fine pitch, and that included the seatbelt hardware, which is the 7/16 by 20 thread. For the top B-pillar anchor, I took 2 grade 8 nuts, turned down the OD to 5/8 with a lathe, and then TIG welded the nuts onto a 1/4-inch bar stock that spanned the length of the B-pillar. The 2 7/16 20 bolts for the 2 lower anchor points were also welded in. In any frontal impact, the shear forces would pull those bolts straight out of that sheet metal, so now at least there's a structural material tied into the car. So now the fun welding part. Luckily I tacked everything together with my new old CP200 3-phase Miller welder. Man, this thing's a beast. This was recommended from my welding guru Tom, who I went with the Cobra show with last year. Why not go with something newer instead of a crank-dial 80s welder? That's why my old last one sucked, all those goofy electronics that dynamically modulated the output. No thanks, old school for me because it worked well then and it'll work well now. Once everything was located, including the 5/8 welded nut, which went through the 5/8 hole through the B-pillar, the rest was TIG welded. There was also some fun stuff like a new center console that I cut a template out using my new plasma table that I finally remade, and I got it running after cleaning up the ball screws and tracks. Along with those projects included some sheet metal repair and a giant ass 5x10 table for my shop neighbor who makes granite and concrete headstones. Man, this CP200 makes a world of difference and made this job so much easier. While the fab area was a complete war zone, on the tool front, the rotisserie is almost done. I had to save up money to buy some annular cutters for the big cuts that would tear through the regular hole saws. But in order to run those, the mill needed to be set up with a mist cooling system. Those things are stupid expensive, so since I wasn't running anything more than 10 to 15 psi, I made one with Schedule 40 PVC that I'm sure will explode at some point, but will hopefully provide me some relief until I get a new one. The rotisserie vertical supports are done using 2-inch perforated steel which will align with the hydraulic piston, and this still will be pinned together into position once the height is figured out. The extension bar can slide out and extend my base in case I have a top-heavy spin to help increase my footing. The receiver stock was welded for horizontal braces that will give me the length variant. The actual rotisserie part is constructed with 1,000-pound pillow blocks. Why? Because I don't want this thing to bind up when rotating, and why not? That's what these bearings are designed for. The shaft is designed to have both fork-style vehicle mounts or skewer types that go through the whole car like for the Mini. For the car projects, I now have a few customer cars as well as my own to keep me on my toes. Both of them luckily are dealing with what some consider as the worst job ever, which is wiring. Now, from my professional and hobbyist life, I've seen some pretty bad wiring. Back in the day, my first restoration was this 1970 Datsun 240Z, which all started with the 12 volt that was used to power the high power radio coming from a splice tap on the brake light switch. Every time the radio turned on, the brake, the parking, and marker lights would blow a fuse. The while I'm in there's kicked in, unfortunately, and what would have been a $12 1-hour fix ended up with a new paint job, R200 differential, Toyota 4x4 brakes, suspension overhaul, rebuilt L28T with a custom EFI and a Garrett turbo and a T5 transmission, all of which I used to do after work. Oh, and fresh wiring. One of the more recent wiring projects was my old S52 E30 BMW. I was trying to figure out why one of my gauges was flickering, so I popped out the panel to expose this rat's nest. I guess I should have given them credit for being creative in using anything that was conductive. I took my time and did it right. For me, wiring is one of those tasks that, yes, can be challenging, but if you think about things first and take the time to do things right, it can be somewhat relaxing. I use TXL grade wire, which is the highest grade for automotive wiring, along with Deutsch connectors, which are very high quality and can withstand the tortures of an automotive environment. For wire protection, I use UV and temp-resistant heat shrink and split loom to allow for some opening in some cases. Each connection is labeled and captured in a schematic. While the ZHP isn't getting any love, it is the only thing that is drivable, so I can at least move it out of the way to make some room. The first on the list is this 1948 F100. This was a project from a longtime friend back in my community college high school days when I was part of a 5-liter Mustang club. He unfortunately passed away, so another club member and close friend's younger brother picked it up to get it back on the road. This was a good opportunity to show what a good wiring job can do. This is now powered by a 302 Ford V8 and a Holley Sniper EFI system. The wiring needed a ton of help and none of these lights or accessories ever worked. A new harness would not only give a sigh of relief, but also tie into the EFI wiring much better, rather than patching it into an existing harness. This will be fun. While I usually prefer to start from scratch, we decided to use an old pre-made fuse block from a Ron Francis kit that I had a long time ago. I had it pre-wired for a previous application. The benefits of these systems are packaging and ease of connections, as they usually have relays and turn signals that are already set up. The drawbacks, however, usually include the fact that there are extra circuits that are no longer used and end up being coiled up wires. These also don't have provisions for circuit breakers or relays for high amp devices like fans or fuel pumps. That basically means that they still need a lot of work despite having the majority of the work completed with the finished fuse block. Simple, reliable, and robust. That's how an automotive wiring system should be. No plastic covered insulated terminals, no splice taps. Blah! Bad wiring can result in all sorts of issues, which include hardware functionality concerns as well as fire risk. Anyway, speaking of bad wiring, another project is this wicked cool 1972 Lotus Europa. This thing took quite an effort to get to my shop, and so here we go with another case of this crap only happens to me. While I fixed the trailer from that last fiasco back in November's bearing failure after dropping off that E30, since I was on a budget and apparently axles were on back order for months, I TIG welded a new stub after fixturing the hell out of that old axle. Yay, I finally had a working trailer. So, while helping my buddy with the Ford, I figured it was easier for me to work on the car while it was at my shop. So hey, freshly fixed trailer, let's do this. So the morning of, I realized, hey, that's a gazillion pound truck that doesn't run. I'm getting wiser in my old age, and back when I could, I bought this nice 4,000 pound hoist years ago, which luckily I was able to power with a spare 12 volt battery that my brother from another mother, Mark, had on hand. I never had time to install it, so now I had a reason. So the morning of the big tow, I welded up a front bracket to allow me to remove the hoist when it wasn't used. Sweet, a working trailer and a working wrench. Let's do this. We picked up the truck in the old Tacoma, and the old truck handled it. This was the first big tow after I installed the stainless steel brake lines and Tundra front calipers and vented discs. I love this truck. Anyway, we had finally got into the parking lot. As we turned the corner, I noticed that same wheel that the repaired axle negatively cambered. The cotter pin apparently holding the big lock nut sheared, causing the nut to back out and screw up the axle and bearing. Yay! So now I have another axle to save up for. So, back to the Lotus. We were able to borrow a trailer from the friend of the Lotus owner. Just bring the trusty Tacoma down there and it should be a snap, right? Ha! Right. That trailer, of course, needed wiring as well. So here I am packing my emergency wiring kit and wiring up a single axle trailer with absolutely zero mounting provisions. Yeah, that was an adventure coming home. Fun times indeed. I've never worked on anything this delicate before, but this vehicle already had a pre-made fuse block and wiring that needed to be routed along with the final terminations. The challenge here will be grounding, when the entire car is a hodgepodge of steel, fiberglass, and aluminum, yet I'm still in love. On the personal car front, the 1970 BMW 2002 is still in focus to redo the chunky stock ECU harness with something a little bit lighter and simpler. There's so much overhead on this harness and that is completely unnecessary. So for a cleaner look in the engine bay, I'm going to attempt to redo this. I'm going to start with a pinout for the ECU and sourcing all the factory connectors and pins. I also have a fuel system going in, but I'll get into that later. Combined with all the same factory colors and gauges, I should be good. In other wiring news, a good buddy and I went on a sweet 1973 Porsche 914. This is the perfect midlife crisis car, but the one that came with the Honda J35 V6. I love me some 914s, and even though the last one I had was a complete disaster from the previous owner, including an engine which was a 2.0 bored out to 2.2, leaving no material left to dissipate heat, so you couldn't drive the thing for more than 15 minutes without it overheating. I always contemplated a swap on that car though, yet I wasn't too impressed with the Subaru engines, and the LS V8s were too much. As my appreciation for Honda engines increases, this was the perfect combo. Wait, you getting a running car? Ha! Nope, it came in pieces. The first step is understanding the wiring and to basically get this thing running before I go crazy. This car came from a big name in the 914 forum group, so I have to carry the torch and do it right. Speaking of Honda engines, the Simca. Last time we were getting ready to prep the gearbox to accept the new input shaft to adapt the Honda clutch and flywheel. Just as I started designing, I found a dude in Europe who did the exact same swap. He ended up making a shaft for me, and I finally took delivery of it. Unfortunately, I noticed the issue with the shaft, as the splines were cut a little too much on a few teeth. Even though it's hardened, I'm sure it'll work, but I decided to continue with my own design myself. I found a local place that would do low volumes of one, and at the same time design in CV shafts instead of these aging universals, which means custom hubs on both ends. Ah, does the fun stop? Nope. The things I scratched the surface on and started to plan for are this 1969 BMW 2002. While I might make a spare M42 harness for one of the many M42s that I've hoarded over the years, making this into an electric would be awesome as well. I've also started doing the math to get general sizing. On the EV front, I'm still fiddling around with the Fiat 500e, but going nowhere on the EV Mini, as the car is still weighing down candy, which is just waiting to see sunlight again so I can rip out that 454, make it just a hair lighter to move around, and start ripping out that interior. But it's currently holding the front end of the Innocenti that's getting the Yamaha R1 swap. Once that rotisserie is done, I can tackle this rust. Speaking of rust, there's another Mini that needs a complete new cowl, and of course the N600 that's still on the hunt for steel wheels and getting this fuel pump installed. Man, I've got my work cut out for me.